You're listening to Energy Insiders, a weekly update on clean energy and climate policy with Renew Economy's editor Giles Parkinson and leading energy analyst David Leach. Energy Insiders is brought to you by Evergen, providing cutting-edge energy management software for battery optimisation, virtual power plants and distributed energy resources. And Pylon, helping solar installers and retailers design high-resolution solar proposals in minutes.
Hello and welcome to this latest episode of the Energy Insiders podcast. My name is Giles Parkinson. I'm the editor-in-chief of Renew Economy and editor of the EV Focus sister site, The Driven. And joining me, as usual, back home, allowed back through immigration, is ITK Principal David Leach. David, how did you do that?
I feel, Australian customs has become incredibly efficient these days, Giles. It's probably a long time since you've left your local area, but some of us do travel, and it's incredible how efficient it is to get through customs these days with the automated systems. But anyway, whilst we could talk for a while about that and probably where people are going for their Christmas vacation, I think it's far more important for our listeners to understand that we've had an absolutely great interview today with Nicola Falcon to coincide with the release of the 2026 draft ISP.
Well, that was my introduction, which you wonderfully stolen, but that's great. And we did have a fantastic interview with Nicola. Yes, let's have a listen to it. And then after that, we'll get back with the news of the week. And there's been a bit. So let's have a listen to Nicola first. Nicola Falcon, thank you very much for joining us on the Energy Insiders podcast.
Thanks for having me.
It's the first integrated system plan that I think that you have led. Am I right about that? And how does it feel? Only at draft stage yet, and yet to finalise.
Yeah, so it feels pretty good. It's not the first that I've been involved in. I've actually been involved right from 2018, but the first one that, at least for the last few months, I've been leading. So certainly not going to take the credit for the work that's been done up till now. We're 18 months into the 2-year process, but it's great to get this one out the door and be able to start talking about it.
The general theme of the ISP has been pretty consistent right from the start in 2018, and it basically is that sort of, renewables, wind, solar, storage, a bit of gas is the optimal way, the cheapest way, the most efficient way of replacing Australia's ageing coal-fired power stations and to meet the federal government targets and its emission goals and what have you. What's been the biggest change or maybe the biggest surprise that you've seen looking over the last 18 months? Because a lot of the assumptions made 2 years ago have changed because things have changed in technologies and other things. What stood out for you?
Yeah, well, you're right. This is a 2-year process. The integrated system plan is a key plan for the energy transition. It looks out sort of 20, 25 years. And when we update it every 2 years, we do go through an extensive amount of consultation. So the first 12 months of that 2-year process is really just spent looking at the inputs, assumptions, looking at trends, talking to stakeholders about what they're seeing in the market. And there have been a number of inputs and changes. So I think the thing that's surprising out of it all is actually the remarkable consistency that we're continuing to see in the plan, even with those changes that are going on around us. It continues to be that least cost mix is renewable generation connected with networks, firmed by storage and backed by gas.
Yeah. And I guess, people have commented about, there might be a little less wind, there might be a bit more solar, there might be more battery storage, there might be a little bit less gas. Thanks to Queensland, there might be a bit more coal, but fundamentally the story hasn't changed. So, and those tweaks and those variations, I guess, are not significant in the overall scheme of things.
No, that they are really aligned with what's happening in industry at the moment and reflective of that. But you're right, there's still going to be fivefold increase in solar and wind that we need from now, where we've got about 23 gigawatts on the system, to 120 gigawatts by 2050. Yes, a little bit more battery and solar coming up now, and that's driven by the fact that we are seeing costs for the utility scale solar come down, utility scale storage rather come down just so significantly. And, we're seeing that industry is responding. We've got close to 26 gigawatts in the connections pipeline now for storage coming through to 2030. And solar's a really nice complement to that, right?
Yeah.
So it can, charge the batteries during the middle of the day, and then the batteries can discharge at night when the sun sets. So it's not surprising that you sort of see a little bit more of a mix of solar and storage, particularly given that those trends that we're seeing. But wind is still gonna have such a big role to play, and, by 2050, as I said, we're still needing significant investment in both sources.
Yeah. Okay. My last question before handing over to Dave for a while. Just on that battery storage, what else has that made you sort of think about in terms of your plan and the whole transition thing? I mean, battery storage is emerging as a potential replacement or provider of system services, even system strength. Now, you guys are sort of still, and the transmission companies are still thinking in terms of synchronous condensers as an important bit, but it seems to me that you're at the stage now where you're recognizing that grid-forming inverters could do this job, but you need more evidence that they can and they will.
That's exactly right. We've actually gonna start some real-world trials so that we can really test that and understand it. We need to, see what on paper is looking promising, actually be demonstrated before we start taking risks with reliability and security of supply, but really seeing that there's promising signs.
And those trials, I'm just sort of putting another question there. It's actually quite interesting because one of those trials which you're going to have next year is for the first time in the world running a grid of more than 100 megawatts with no engines, basically, or no spinning machines. So that's really interesting. I mean, we've seen that happen in various mine sites that might have a load of 10 to 15 megawatts. Here we're talking about in terms of 100 megawatts, and presumably from there, it's not such a big leap to the whole grid.
That's right. So we're still at the process of working out exactly who's going to participate in that trial, what region or sub-region we might use, and really designing it. But that'll be a great learning for all of us in terms of how we might take it forward, not just for Australia, but internationally. People are watching.
Nicola, I just might start with a little bit for people who haven't been following along all this time. How, you've been, as you say, with the ISP since 2018, and it's been a steady plan. Um, I guess how much evolution has there been in the methodology of and the execution and refinement? I suppose after whatever it is, 8 years or so, you must be reasonably confident in the way that you're going about it. I mean, it's a lot of time for the bugs to be worked out.
Yes, there's a lot that's the same, and there's a lot that's different, and the differences are really around where the expansion of scope has come, and I'll touch on that in a little bit. But we now also have a much greater ability, thanks to great compute and cloud and all these other things, to run many, many more simulations. So what that means we can do is when we're looking at an integrated system plan and looking at what is the lowest cost mix of generation, storage, and networks, we can run thousands of different possible combinations or what we call candidate development paths to be able to sift through and find out what is the lowest cost that's going to support the transition and be a benefit for consumers. So, technology is helping us and enable us to do a really, really thorough and robust assessment after we've done all of the consultation. But the other thing that is new in the scope this year is the inclusion of the role that distribution network can play in the integrated system plan. And really, we're not looking at the full role that investment in distribution plays, but really what might allow us to unlock some of that latent capacity on consumers, solar PV and so forth, to maximize value for all consumers. And we're seeing that in itself could unlock about 4 gigawatts of capacity. And that's not new investment. That's investment that we're seeing that consumers are having that they just can't get into the system at the moment. The other thing that's new is starting to really look at the interrelations with gas and the gas that's going to be required to supply the gas-powered generation, that we see having a reducing energy role, but still a very, very critical role to play through the transition in backing up renewable generation and storage for those renewable lulls that we talk about that are sort of, a week long of still conditions and so forth. Now, that gas has to come from somewhere. So this ISP is the first ISP where we've actually started looking at some of the gas development projections. And that's investment in gas transport and infrastructure, perhaps even regasification terminals, to make sure that we've got the gas available when gas power generation needs it.
Yes, and I would argue you could also do repowering of gas as things like alumina refineries retire, then that or are electrified, then that can free up gas. But that's a completely separate topic. I just, one of the other things I notice about it, of course, is it's a plan and not something that AEMO can actually implement. And I guess people will sort of question how you can build like I think it calls for 24 more or less gigawatts of more onshore wind by 2035 and 27 gigawatts of solar. It's a lot to get built in the next 10 years. And I guess a lot of the decisions about that will need to get made fairly soon, won't they?
They do. I think when we look even at what you need by 2030, when we look in our connections pipeline, the storage looks like it's just about there, but I think we've got about two-thirds of the wind and solar that we're going to need. So, we do need to see more projects advancing quite quickly. Um, While you say that, there's nothing that AEMO can necessarily do, it's just a plan and we can't action it, we do hear from industry that it does get used a lot to help inform their investment decisions, guide.
Oh, I've no doubt about that.
So,
I've no doubt
no,
about that.
I think it's not that it's void of reality. There certainly is a reflection of what's going on in industry, but there is going to be a challenge, right? And that's one of the reasons that we looked at that constrained delivery sensitivity, just to sort of see what might happen if we don't quite hit the targets.
Yes, I read that. In terms of the plan itself, of course, it is governed by government policies as they're an input, aren't they? Really. And so when the Queensland, and I mean, I must say it's a credit to somehow to Australia, I suppose, that with a change in federal government and a change in New South Wales government and a change in Queensland government, it's really only the change in the Queensland government that's affected the plan in any great meaningful way. Is that a reasonable statement?
Yeah, the main things that have really changed are around Queensland and the extension of coal. So in the 2024 ISP, we had most coal exiting the system before the 2040s, whereas now with Queensland government's intent to keep coal in the system for longer, we have reflected that, and we're now seeing that some of the coal plant in Queensland won't stay in for longer. But if you think about coal in general and you park Queensland to the side for a minute, the remaining coal units in the NEM are on average 40 years old. And, when you look back at the age that coal is retired up till now, it's about 44 years old. So they really are getting to the end of their life. We're still certainly seeing for the rest of that NEM, most of the coal is going to be closed by 2035 and, all of it gone well before 2040. But Queensland's average age of their coal is about 30 years. So, there is a scenario where you could see them extended to the sort of the 2049 timeframe we've said, but we see that they'd need to be operating a lot more flexibly than they are today.
Yes, that's right. And we are seeing generators, even in Victoria and New South Wales, have shown that they can be far more flexible than people might have imagined 10 years ago. But let's not dwell on that too much. I also, for the benefit of some of our readers, it's interesting to think about how you incorporate a carbon budget in that. There's no shadow carbon price, but the ODP has to achieve, am I saying this correctly, a certain carbon emissions outcome. Is that the right way to think about it?
Yes, we have what we call carbon budgets that we assume for our different scenarios. So, first and foremost, we're meeting all of the government policies, and many of them are already going a long way towards supporting renewable generation and seeing a decarbonisation of the power system. But what we do is look at three different scenarios, which have they really vary just in terms of the speed at which you might be able to decarbonise the energy sector. And we do that by driving different carbon budgets that might leave you at a different degrees temperature warming by 2050. So we have a slower progress, we have a step change, and we have an accelerated transition. So those constraints on how much carbon you can use, the budget, if you like, does influence somewhat the speed at which coal does retire. But as I said, the government policy is also driving a lot of that.
So it's economics and policy, those two things. And, anyone who looks at the economics will clearly see that the middle of the day goes away for coal. And then and in the evenings, as we get more batteries, it's going to struggle with and more wind, it would struggle with the overnight revenue. But I'll leave that. That's my opinion. I had, I think, two more things that I just wanted to cover off here. One was a kind of technical thing, sort of. I mean, us people within the renewable industry always arguing about we should be doing this or we should be doing that, like more solar and batteries or more wind. But my particular sort of thing is around whether we should be emphasising the south of New South Wales and Victoria more, and whether we're actually building enough transmission. If I look in the one of the appendices, the Southwest Renewable Zone has 14 gigawatts of wind. This is not a new story of potential, but only 1 gigawatt or something, or 2 gigawatts getting built, and it's an A-class correlation with demand. Kind of seems that if you were doing the whole thing from scratch again today, you might design the transmission network differently, particularly now that maybe offshore wind is turning out to be harder than people might have thought in more optimistic times.
Oh, perhaps, David. The reality is that we have the network that we have today, and what we're wanting to do is make sure that we think about investment that makes most sense for consumers going forward. So, yes, we are seeing some, even in Victoria, you mentioned Victoria, we are seeing some changes as the coal in the Latrobe Valley is going to shut down. Then we are going to need more investment on the west. That's become one of the actionable projects this time, to reinforce the Western Victoria, make sure we can get power into metropolitan Melbourne. So there are some changes that are going on in the network as we start seeing the generation sources appearing in different locations. But generally speaking, I agree with your views around the importance of transmission. And we're certainly seeing in this plan the role that transmission plays is just so important for consumers, ensuring that we can get that renewable generation from those rural and regional areas into the homes and businesses when they need it. Share those resources across the different geographies, make sure we tap into both the solar and the wind resources to get technical diversity as well. And also, and often forgotten, building that resilience by tapping into those deep storages that we have in Tasmania and we have in the Snowy Hydro scheme, so that when we do get those renewable lulls, when we do get unexpected outages, we've got that resilience through the very deep, long duration storage there. So transmission is still really, really important, and we've figured our estimates is it's about 24 billion of cost savings for consumers by building this transmission.
I think that's an important number. I'll hand back to Giles in 1 second. I just wanted to touch on one of my other favourite things about the ISP. That is that the stakeholders, not enough of them in my opinion, but they all get to kind of vote on it. And one of the innovations in the original ISP was to use this Delphi method, where everyone has a secret vote and then they look at everyone else's vote and then they have another vote, and that's how you decide. And then this time you change the methodology a bit, but it's still the case that 40-something% went for the, essentially, I call it slow, fast, and faster, went for the fast, and another 30-odd%, 26% went for faster. So you've got something like 70%. Those numbers have remained broadly consistent over the last 6 years, haven't they? Indicating that there is it fair to say that indicates that the main stakeholders are supportive of the plan, if I can put it that way, and think that this is the way forward?
Look, we'd like to think so, but this is a draft that we've put out, and we're open to hearing from stakeholders during the consultation to see if they are supportive of the plan or not. That's part of what we do as the consultative process now. But yes, that Delphi panel has evolved. It still is a little bit of a discussion, then goes into a ballot, comes back out, and let's see what everyone's thinking. But one of the things that I think is driving some of those views on likelihood and relative scenario weightings and so forth is the amount of demand growth that we're seeing potentially with data centers coming up, and I think that's a really interesting one to be keeping an eye on. Just how quickly and where those data centers are going to come up is interesting.
And like Giles, you've reminded me about demand, which I spent a lot of time thinking about myself. And I guess it is the data centers, but they haven't. That demand is still uncertain. But equally, a lot of the existing demand comes from aluminium smelters, comes from things like coal mines and stuff like that. That demand is somewhat uncertain, I would argue. If all the smelters are getting subsidies to support them, as a financial analyst or investment banker, it makes me think: is that support going to continue indefinitely?
Well, that's one of the reasons in our slower change scenario, we did actually look at what might happen if we see a structural change in some of the demand that we've got today is not there any further. And the importance of those scenarios is we can really then test the risks for consumers of under and over investment. But I should say that regardless of what might happen with data centres or with some of that smelter load or any of the other loads you just mentioned there, David, we're still seeing a nearly doubling of energy demand between now and 2050 as transport electrifies, as more homes and businesses move from gas. So it's not just the big end of town that's changing that demand forecast. There's a huge amount more reliance on electricity over time as well.
Yeah, that's right. I'd urge all our listeners to have a look at those demand graphs. I think there's a lot to think about in that, a lot of profit tied up in it.
Nicola, just going back onto Queensland, and I'm quite interested to sort of pick up on what you said about, I mean, you had to acknowledge that the Queensland government has changed and their policy has changed. They're seeking to keep the coal-fired power stations running until 2049. But if they are running that long, they're going to have to play a completely different tune. They're going to have to dance a different tune. They're going to have to dance around rooftop solar, etc. And it seems to me just that comment kind of goes to the heart of both the sort of the transition that we're facing in terms of technology and the grid, and I guess the lack of transition in some ways about the political debate and things like that. Now, I don't want you to get political because that's probably not your role, but I'm just wondering if you can just sort of underline and just sort of explain why it is important to think that we are moving beyond a baseload paradigm to something which is based around renewables and dispatchable and flexibility and things like that. David and I talk about it, but I do like to hear from the actual experts when they just sort of underline those issues.
Yeah, look, thanks for drawing this to your listeners' attention. When we talk about coal being in the system, longer, it doesn't mean that we can rely on coal being online at those times. There really is that need for them to start thinking about how they might be shutting down for days, weeks, or even seasons as they compete with that flood of renewable generation coming in. They don't want to be operating when there's negative prices or zero prices, and that is what we see in some times of the day when we've got that abundance of renewable generation. That's the lowest cost mix for consumers. We don't want to be discouraging renewable generation, but it's going to mean that the coal plants need to work around that. Gone are the days of that sort of base load generation for sure. The challenge for that obviously would be that it's not just about renewable generation, and we did touch on it a bit with system security. We just got to make sure that we've got alternatives to coal to provide that system security and stability.
Absolutely, and that's having a firming and dispatchable power, and that's why you're sort of emphasising that you're saying you probably have enough batteries now, and you're underlining the importance of having enough gas-fired peaking generation, etc. Although I do note that it's probably slightly less than what you thought you required a couple of years ago, and that's probably because of the batteries. But just getting back to baseload, so I just want to sort of understand this completely. Not having baseload does not mean that the lights go out.
No, absolutely not. We've got, renewable generation. We can store it. We can use it then for when we need it. The reliability is able to be maintained without baseload generation.
Let's go to households. They're playing such a big role. I think you've upped your expectations. I think I'm right about this, about rooftop solar. By 2050, at least 87 gigawatts. So households collectively will have the biggest capacity of any sort of source of electricity, I suppose. As you combine large-scale wind and solar, they're going to have a lot of batteries. They're going to have a lot of EVs. How fundamental are they going to be to the way that you guys manage the grid in terms of managing the resources? You still want a lot of that to be, I think you describe it as, you can orchestrate it.
They're the biggest generator already, I think, behind the meter. But anyway, let's keep going. Sorry.
Well, that's probably true, actually. Yes.
Yeah, well, by 2050, the consumer energy resources that we call them, which is your rooftop PV, your batteries, and your electric vehicles combined, will be providing half of the capacity supplied for the entire NEM. So, huge role. They're really at the heart of the transition. And to be fair, they're setting the pace at the moment. As Australians, we've got 4 million households with rooftop PV on them. We're seeing with our household home batteries, huge uptake in the amount of CR storage and so forth. We've got, from a power system perspective, there's opportunity through those investments opting in to really provide value, not just for themselves, but also for all Australians. And so one of the things that we talk about in the report is this idea of coordination of CR. Now, that's not AEMO needing to take control. This is absolutely 100% something that consumers would choose to opt in to do. But if there was the right products and value for them to maximise their resources that they've invested in, and be able to, through third-party aggregators or retailers, respond to market signals that meet the needs of the power system, we've seen through our analysis that that would actually reduce costs of this transition by about $7.2 billion, which is a win-win really, because we know that not everyone can access investment in CER, but it would be an opportunity for us to be able to more equitably see that energy transition through, because it would benefit all consumers.
Nicola, just as a bean counter, I mean, it's a reduced system cost in the ISP, but in fact there is still a cost because consumers are just paying for it out of their own pocket because that's their preference. I mean, if you look at it from the one point of view of the total cost to Australia, that's not really considered in this form of analysis, is it?
Well, we do actually provide an estimate for the cost of consumers investing in those resources, but we don't consider it from a optimization point of view, if you like, because really the investment decisions that those mums and dads are making are, not always going to be just what is the most economically efficient thing. They're making it for other personal reasons. The point is that by being able to tap into those resources and maximize the value of the investments, we can actually help benefit all consumers. And I think that's one of the important things to focus on.
Nicola, the integrated system plan applies to the national electricity market, which is in the eastern states. Now, I think you've recently spent a year over in Western Australia, sort of as interim boss over there. And Western Australia, I find quite fascinating because it's a big grid. It's about 4 gigawatts and something at peak demand. Not very much at low demand at the moment because of the impact in rooftop solar, but it's fascinating because it is an isolated grid. It's got no connections to anything else, yet it's trying to manage its own resources. It's assuming, or it's made the assumption that's going to be the last of the coal-fired power stations are going to close at the end of the decade, so 2030, and it's going to have to stand on its own 2 feet with wind, solar. Still probably quite a lot of gas, but an awful lot of battery storage. I mean, 2 of the biggest batteries in the country have been built there, and there's a lot more coming. Your year there, what did you take away from what you saw or learnt in WA and sort of brought back to the eastern states, as it were? I'm just wondering if there's anything valuable to be learnt from that.
Look, one of the things that probably did stand out is their utility scale storages that they now have installed, and the value that that's providing when incentivized to be charging during minimum demand periods. So you mentioned the min demand and it going very, very low. We also are getting huge amounts of batteries charging that time, which is making it much easier for us to maintain system security. There's also, there's different ways of doing business in WA to the NEM, and in many ways it's quite concentrated in terms of the role that the government has to play, the role that the Western Power and Synergy have to play as government-owned industry, and then the private investment. There are probably opportunities to transition quite quickly if you get all of the sort of forces together and agree on what's needed. So, in some ways, I think they can actually make the transition and leapfrog over what we've been doing quite quickly. And as you say, the coal are shutting by 2030. That's all the state coal plants by 2030. It just leaves out one private plant left in the system. But it is a very different transition when you don't have interconnection. And I think that's the one thing that the NEM can really benefit from is that ability to tap into that geography and geographic diversity that we can get on the NEM that's not available in WA so much.
Yeah, and that probably gets us back to sort of transmission. Could I just maybe summarise the issue then, or the position in WA is that if the politicians are minded to, you can actually get things done quite quickly. And one of the things that might be helpful is that not so many levels of regulation, I suppose, to get through, or numbers of regulators. So if someone says, let's do this, it can be done.
It can be done, and they're making it happen.
Yeah, that's interesting. Back to the transmission, and actually, no, David, you go.
Well, I'll ask a question related to that. I guess in regard to all the batteries, one of the things we used to talk about is diversity of wind helping a lot with the system. But essentially, batteries can do so much more of that diversity role, can't they? I mean, I do my own with someone else some price modeling, and what we see is an awful lot of price spikes. Price spikes, which might only occur for 1% of the time, are what drive up costs to consumers that they actually end up paying. Uh, I guess you don't do price forecasts explicitly as part of the modeling, do you?
No, we don't look at the price. We look at just the cost and lowest cost on the expectation that all else being equal, lower costs will mean prices won't be as high as otherwise they would be.
Yes, if the market structure's okay. I won't talk too much about that. Do you look at the volatility of demand, though, and supply? Like, I mean, one of the other things that people think about a lot before need for batteries is that the long periods of wind and solar abundance, we already see this, where prices might be low and the need for operational, there's so much wind and solar that you're curtailing stuff maybe 30% of the time. But then there's other times, very short periods of time, where there's not enough. It seems to me that that volatility will increase the more wind and solar we have in the system. It's not directly covered in the ISP, but it kinds of end up being important to, as I say, to prices and to consumers and stuff like that.
Yeah, well, what we do look at in the ISP is making sure that the system is going to be operable. And it comes a little bit back to Giles's question around, do you need baseload to be able to have a reliable system? We need to make sure we're confident that the mix of renewable generation and storage that we do have in the system is going to maintain reliability. So we take 15 years of historical weather conditions. And, with those weather conditions come variability in temperature, variability therefore in demand, variability in wind and solar. And we run them through multiple simulations with our optimal development path to test whether you do encounter periods of low wind or low solar, and make sure that in those times we have enough of the other investment needed to cover that and maintain reliability. So while we don't look at a variability from a pricing perspective, we certainly look at variability from a weather and therefore resource availability.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the achievements of the ISP is it clearly demonstrates, and no one's ever demonstrated to the contrary, that the unserved energy standard is met with the system. I mean, it works. No one's ever been able to show that it doesn't work, whatever the cost and price consequences are.
No. And it's up to us to make sure it's going to work too, because at the end of the day, we do also operate the market and the
Yes.
systems, and we've got to maintain that reliability. So yes.
Mm. It was interesting, actually. There was an application to actually change the reliability standards or sort of soften it a bit. And the reason given was that the high price and the difficulty of actually obtaining new peak and gas generators.
Yeah, I'm not so across where that's going. I know there's often discussions about what the reliability standard should or shouldn't be. But yeah, I'm
Yeah.
not privy to the
Okay.
deliberations.
And just getting back to batteries again, because they seem to be the big mover in all these technologies, at least in prices. I think we've had a couple of stories over the last couple of days, from BNEF and Ember, just sort of pointing to the 40% falls in battery storage costs over each of the last 2 years, and that's that's confirmed. Just talking to the likes of AGL and Origin and the other big battery developers, and how they're all rapidly expanding their size of their batteries. What's the potential role for them sort of acting as sort of virtual transmission and sort of going to maybe addressing some of the issues that David sort of picked up in things like the Southwest Renewable Zone? You've got the big increase in transmission costs. What's I guess you describe them as non-network options. I'm not too sure. What's the potential of that, or is that something that's still being discovered?
No, that's actually we've got the Waratah super battery is one example where it's what we call a system integration protection scheme, but that is effectively a virtual transmission line, allowing us to operate the real transmission lines at higher ratings with comfort. That if there was a event on the system, we'd be able to then kick the battery into gear very quickly, and therefore be able to ride the lines as they're currently at their ratings a little bit harder than otherwise would be the case. So It's happening. We've seen it. There's also in Victoria, there's similar sort of protection schemes in place. So there's always going to be a role for that. It will get assessed in any transmission project we identify in the ODP as being actionable. It gets assessed by the transmission network service providers, and they are required to look at non-network options as well. So they will also test whether there's value in that as an alternative to the transmission line. But for some of this really large transmission, we're going to need more than what we could get out of some of those batteries.
It's just I want to ask a kind of propeller head sort of, even though I'm not one, kind of question. But I mean, one of the things that was mentioned in the ISP, or one of the outcomes is some a little bit more solar and less wind megawatts, gigawatts. But part of that is due to assuming bigger wind turbines and also a change in capacity factors. I think maybe you used to assume a 4.5 megawatt turbine. Has it gone up to 6 gigawatts? What's happened to the wind capacity factors? Are you able to talk about that just briefly?
Yeah, you're spot on. That's exactly what's happening, is that, we are seeing that the turbine blades are getting bigger. We're able to get more energy from the same capacity. So effectively, the wind farms are getting more efficient. That creates higher capacity factors, which means you get the same amount of generation with less capacity total.
Yeah, but also the did you remeasure any wind speeds or stuff like that? There's constant complaints. The oldest story in the book is that whatever the wind farm producer says they're going to produce, when I look at the numbers, it'll be less. But they all say, in fact, AEMO underestimates the wind resource nevertheless, and there is really more wind and so on. And I think you might have have you remeasured wind speeds, or what have you actually done?
We did. We heard that feedback from stakeholders, and we've been able to get better data sets to reassess that. You mentioned the Southwest Res earlier. I mean, that's one where we're seeing better capacity factors now. So it's a combination of the technology changes and also improvements in data and weather speed measurements. Absolutely.
And one final question from me. You did a constraint scenario suggesting, all the sort of issues that might be around with sort of planning delays and supply chain issues and things like that. But you still came up with a number of 75%, which is pretty close to 82% and still a remarkable outcome if we do get there, and highly significant. Might it end up being a bit lower than that, or are you sort of pretty confident that that's where we're going to land by 2030, of course?
Look, it wasn't a sensitivity where we looked at the worst case outcomes. It was one where we sort of looked at trends that we've seen and the progress and speeding up the development and connections year on year, and looked at, well, if we sort of carried on at that pace rather than having to have a step change in the capability of the industry, what would that look like? But, those delays and the challenges that industry are facing are on many fronts, and it could be supply chain, it could be social license, it could be planning approvals, it could be construction. You could always imagine worse worlds where all of those things compound together, and that's one of the reasons why we've really called for that concerted action that continues to need to be made. We need to stay focused on the job at hand. Industry is doing an amazing job already. We are well into the transition. We're seeing huge amounts of development compared to where we were a few years ago. A lot of the transmission is now in progress of getting delivered, but we just need to stay focused on some of those challenges that could get in the way.
I think you've answered my final question of what message would you like to leave our listeners with. But, as you say, you've been with the program, I think maybe with Eli Peck, is who I've set for pretty much from the beginning. What over and above what you've just said, is there a learning or some recommendation or something else you want to tell our audience?
I think I would just really reflect on how important it is that we are getting the views of all of the stakeholders in this. We want to get a plan that is something that everyone can get behind and deliver on. This is a draft that we've put out. We really are keen for people to give us feedback on that draft, and we've got submissions open till the middle of February. And just the input and the involvement we get from stakeholders is so important to make sure this plan continues to be robust, continues to be consistent, and we really would appreciate as much input as we can.
And so submissions back by February, and then the final report in June, is that right?
Correct.
Okay. Well, Nicola Falcon, thank you very much for joining us on the Energy Insiders podcast. We wish you best of luck and lots of fun as you work through the submissions and engage with the hundreds and I think more than 1,000 people who seem to get involved at some point or another. So look forward to hearing more from you and congratulations on another fine piece of work. I mean, subject of a lot of debate and interpretation, but I think as David has written many times, it's as good a plan as we could wish.
I think so, and I think it's also worth giving a cheer to AEMO for all the data that they make available. I personally use, for instance, the wind and solar traces. There's the REZs identified. There's just a massive amount of data. You can actually model away and come up with your own fantasy world for as long as you like using that AEMO stuff.
Great. Well, I'm glad you find it useful, and it's been a pleasure being on today with you all.
G'day, Alex Carey here. The Goodwee ESA all-in-one home storage solution is here, and it's a game changer. It's packed with market-leading features, full home backup and 6-level battery protection. With up to 48 kilowatt hours in a single stack, the ESA is a breeze to install with no gateway needed. The Goodwee ESA series is available now and priced to cover the 2026 drop in the rebate. Visit goodwee.com.au for more information.
And that was Nicola Falcon from the Australian Energy Market Operator and the ISP. As you said at the start, David, I thought that was a pretty interesting interview. Very clear, very concise.
Two things that came through from me were, firstly, the benefits of building the 14% expansion in Australia's transmission network. That very clearly has a lot of benefits, and that's been a consistent theme throughout the iterations of the plan that we've had over the last 8 years. And as much as it costs money to build transmission, in the end, the benefit is high value. It's very high value. And the second thing that really stood out to me is that the 50% by the time we get to 2050, consumers behind the meter stuff is 50% of the total system generation and power. I mean, that is an incredible statistic. And if you'd said that 5 or 10 years ago, and, to think that we had people saying that the feed-in tariffs for solar should never be a repeated mistake. I mean, look at what it's actually produced for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And talking about solar coasters now, we might be going through a bit of a battery coaster at the moment too, because the home battery rebate has been wonderfully successful. So successful that even I went out and got one and installed that. Had that installed yesterday, but I'm usually pretty slow on these things.
Jesus, they must be cheap. Scott.
No, look, I write about these things, but often fail to act on them. But on this occasion, I have. But clearly, it's been so successful, and there's obviously issues around with these really big and cheap systems, which are kind of flooding the markets and distorting the price signals. But anyway, David, back on to
Giles, as successful as the home battery scheme is, and it is incredibly successful, it still pales a little bit. It's only the smaller part of what's going on in batteries, isn't it? I mean, the utility battery news every week, batteries continue to be announced, expanded, grown, connected, financed,
absolutely
charged up.
I mean, just going through what's happened just in the last 4 days. We've got the Melbourne Renewable Energy Hub outside of Melbourne, which just got officially opened. So that's the biggest in Victoria. Golden Plains battery got financed and will begin construction. Origin has expanded what is going to be the biggest battery in Australia at Raring, funnily enough. 700 megawatts and now more than 3,200 megawatt hours, I think. So 4.5 hours. Neoen has just doubled the size of its Western Downs battery in Queensland to more than 2,000 megawatt hours. I mean, it's going to build it, hasn't done it yet. And and there was something else, and I've forgotten what it is. And Potentia Energy has just raised finance for a bunch of projects, including what will be the first solar battery hybrid. Which is interesting because that was one of the main inputs into AEMO's integrated system plan. suggesting that there will be more solar and battery hybrids in the near term than wind, which I guess is what we knew. But it was interesting that Nicola Falcon was also, as you have often done, insisted that wind is a vital component, and we're going to need plenty of it.
Well, Giles, my Christmas wish is that in 2026, we're here talking on the podcast regularly and talking about a new wind project that actually is getting notice to proceed, because, 2026 is the critical year for wind development in regards to 2030. But that's not the only news of the week. So, the battery story continues to boom. But in addition, we've had the AEMC thinking hard about network tariffs, have we not?
We have, and two things there, both of which will be sort of controversial depending on which way you're looking at it. So two decisions, one on pricing, and this is a draft proposal, and it's got a few people worried about sort of fixed and constant and consistent network prices for consumers, which raises a bunch of issues, and people are concerned that it might actually just sort of reduce the incentive for being efficient or even self-consuming. So that's an interesting one.
So to be clear in what you were saying there, you're saying that the AEMC is recommending that fixed charges be a bigger part of the wires and poles cost.
Yes, but also consistent too, because if you actually go through different sort of retailers and different offerings, there's kind of fixed charges that will change all over the place, depending on who you've got. So I think they want absolute clarity on that, and really doesn't matter whether you've got solar and batteries or not. You should be paying the same network charge. At least that's as I understand it.
One of the sub-recommendations there that they wanted to emphasise is that really the retailer should be deciding the form of the tariff structure, not the network. The networks have designed tariffs to appeal directly to consumers, but of course networks don't charge consumers; they charge retailers. Retailers set tariffs, and what retailers want is generally complete and utter simplicity, because they find that's the only thing they can sell.
I thought confusion was profit, David.
It is profit. Buy sheep and sell deer, you mean?
Just make the bill really confusing and confuse the hell out of people and get them to sign up to things they don't really need or don't really want or don't understand.
Yes, but you'd have to make it sound simple.
Oh, okay, then fair enough. Yes. Okay. Slogans.
Well, just a fixed, sign up for X dollars a month and Netflix, and never mind the rest.
Free solar in the middle of the day.
That sort of thing. Anyway, we shouldn't spend too long on it, but the point is the AEMC has proposed pricing. That there is a real issue when you look at the ISP, and it's an obvious issue that we've talked about lots of times, is that the amount of electricity delivered from utilities to households is going to be flat or even declining, despite the fact that households are going to be consuming lots more electricity due to electrification.
Yes, just 20 terawatt hours out of about 400 terawatt hours. It's going to, overall demand from the grid doubles, and household demand from the grid falls by 40%, I think.
So the underlying reality is that historically, retailers have made all their money out of selling to the household sector. The margin on selling to a household is about, $40 a megawatt hour, for want of a different number. The margin on selling for the EBITDA margin on selling to a business customer, greater than 100 megawatt hours a year consumption, is more like $4 or $5 a megawatt hour. So, they're making 10 times as much per customer. And networks are exactly the same. Networks make most of their money out of selling to households in the end. So if households are going to be consuming less money from the grid, then retailers and networks have to adjust their models. And AEMC is kind of pointing the way for networks by saying the fixed cost is going to be upgraded, but the retailers are going to have to think hard how they're going to make money out of this.
Yeah, that's right, yes. And when we talked to Frank Calabria from Origin Energy last week, it wasn't entirely clear what that model looked like.
No, no one so far, I think, has come up with a winning answer. Some of the small retailers, people always like to talk about AMBO, which I think still got less than 100,000 customers. talk about selling to the grid and all of those sorts of things. But it's not really a consistent model for large-scale profits that's going to support big companies going forward. But anyway, that's a topic for another day as well. Another piece of news, Queensland government once again stuck its head in the sand. If it stuck it any further down, you reckon it'd disappear altogether by abandoning renewable energy targets. I mean, Nicola Falcon was pretty polite in the way she put it, but it's pretty clear that the people who actually run the electricity system not wildly supportive of the Queensland approach. Now, I may be putting words in their mouth there, but I mean, it's pretty dumb. It's like trying to run syncons and playing to an inverter market, an inertia market, when in fact the world is moving to an inverter market. You can't really mix and match. It doesn't work like that. It's one or the other. And coal generation isn't going to have a place in the future electricity system. I'm sure the Queensland government will make it work somehow or other. But
well, no, they won't, because this government will be gone by then, I would imagine. But the idea that you could keep these things running for another 25 years is pretty absurd, and in the way that they imagine that they might be running, which is as sort of baseload and always on and what have you. And I think Nicola Falcon made it absolutely clear that these things are going to have to be switched off. They're going to have to, not just two-shifting, they're probably going to have to be mothballed for sort of, weeks or months or seasons.
I think there's a phrase we had when we were growing up, Giles, or maybe you didn't have it where you were, I was pushing something uphill, as it was the kind of phrase.
Yes, moss. Maybe it was moss. Yes,
moss.
Yes,
yes pushing moss uphill gathers no stones, or something. Look, hey, it must be Christmas. What else have we got this week?
Oh, look, I think that's better. And we did skim over when we were talking about the AEMC rule change. We forgot about the gas bit, which was interesting. So any new connections will have to pay full freight for the cost of their gas connection, so that new connection, the cost of that does not get sort of sprayed over everybody else, because there will not be long-lasting assets, judging by the pace of electrification and what battery storage is doing to things. So I thought that was interesting.
Well, it is interesting in the context also of the ISP. One of the most interesting charts in there was the one that of the gas generation, which shows how much less gas generation on average there is in 2025 compared to 10 years ago. And then you look at, there will be even less gas generation in total, but at certain times of the year, it's going to be very strong. And we're going to have, the way it is at the moment, all these pipes, gas pipes, transmission pipes, and gas generators sitting around, not doing much most of the time. It's your standard reserve capacity kind of thing, and it all has to be paid for. And I think that's something that we have to think of, because the use of gas for other purposes is also going to decline, just pushing up these fixed costs over ever smaller volumes. And, the households are one part of it, because when households pay their gas bill, the smallest part of it is actually the gas itself. The biggest part of that bill is the pipes.
Yeah, no, look, that's exactly right. And I was going to talk about solar farm too, but I'm just looking for something here, and someone's deleted their comments, so I'm not going to talk about that. I thought I had a good story there, David, but it's disappeared. But it was just relating to the Wellington North Solar Farm fire out at just past Dubbo, which created a bit of a look
Wellington.
At Wellington. Yes. Funnily enough, just the normal, just sort of misinformation, disinformation, scaremongering about what it actually means to have a fire there. I think the Australian wrote that the actual solar farm was on fire. Well, I don't think it was. I think it was the grass around it was on fire. It was pretty quickly extinguished. The solar farm was back at full capacity within about 36 hours. And by all accounts, the local fire brigades were quite impressed with the quick response, not both of that solar farm and also the neighbouring ones. The fact that the sheep had kept the grass down, and the fact that the main fire issue was in the Environmental Offsets Department paddock, which...
So that's all good stuff. But I think, Giles, let's face it, renewable energy is big business, and there's lots and lots of assets. And you can be absolutely certain there are going to be ongoing incidents, whether it's a piece of a wind turbine falling on someone, a fire, a battery fire. We are going to get ongoing incidents. Nothing so far has said, to my knowledge, that the development has been done badly on average, or that the incidents should be any reason for changing anything. But yeah,
Well, no, and that's exactly where I wanted to make the point about this because, yes, incidents do happen, but they can be very easily managed, and it shouldn't be a cause for sort of mass hysteria and what have you. So, and that I
maybe
think.
the Australian's got nothing else to write about, Giles. But anyway, we're not here to bag the Australian because
I don't
we've
see
only
why
got a
not.
couple of hours.
Oh dear.
Maybe we should move on to the Telegraph. No. Let's wind it up. Probably our listeners have got want to get on with their
Other
jobs.
things to do, and it's nearly Christmas, so there you go. Thank you very much, David, for joining us, and welcome back to Australia. I'm glad they didn't check your social media files, as they will be doing at the US Customs from now on, apparently.
It's incredible. I used to visit the US every year for work, and I must say it's off-putting to have that sort of visa thing for work and for pleasure. I've got a great fondness for the USA and the people there and the many varieties of Americans and cultures and stuff, but
I was just mentioning that the National Renewable Energy Laboratory is no more the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. It's the National Laboratory of the Rockies. They've got rid of the word renewable energy. So.
Climate change isn't happening in America.
No, that's been written away from the books as well. So
that's right.
Thank goodness for that.
That's right.
Anyway, thanks very much to Nicola Falcon from AEMO for joining us to discuss the integrated system plan. Thanks, of course, to our sponsors Evergen and Pylon. Thanks to all the people listening out there. I do want to draw an attention to a couple of our sister podcasts, particularly the Solar Insiders one, which discusses the household battery rebate and what might happen there, with the Smart Energy Council's David McElrea. And there's a great interview too with the Switched On podcast, which is talking about gas networks and the rolling up of that and how that can actually go quite wrong in certain circumstances. And we have environmental Victoria's Kat Lucas Healy speaking on the Switched On podcast. Both very good listens. David, that's it from us. Bye for now, and we'll be back with another episode next week. Goodbye.
Energy Insiders was brought to you by Evergen, the market-leading renewable energy software business that optimises residential and commercial solar and battery systems. Evergen enables large numbers of systems to operate as a single fleet, so network operators can use them as a virtual power plant, generating significant value for consumers, network operators, and the energy system as a whole. Evergen software is powering the energy system of the future. Energy Insiders was also brought to you by Pylon. Pylon provides easy-to-use solar design software for installers and retailers with pay-as-you-go pricing, no monthly cost and no lock-in contracts. Join Australia's top solar companies who trust Pylon to design high-resolution, CEC-ready solar proposals.